On May 12, 1866, a marriage certificate in Nashville recorded something slavery had tried to erase. Isaac and Catherine Kelly had lived as husband and wife. A sale tore them apart. After the war, they found each other and married again. The clerk added a brief note explaining that the couple had been separated by sale and had resumed their marriage since the war. That sentence survives today among the records of the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, better known as the Freedmen's Bureau. It looks like a small piece of paperwork. It was also evidence of a revolution inside American family life. But what had freedom actually changed between 1865 and 1877? During the period called Reconstruction, roughly 4 million formerly enslaved people tried to build lives beyond the legal ownership of another human being. The change did not arrive everywhere on a single morning. The Emancipation Proclamation had applied to areas in rebellion beginning in 1863. Freedom followed Union armies across the South, and slavery remained legal in some places until state action or the 13th Amendment abolished it nationwide in December 1865. Even then, a constitutional sentence could end legal slavery without instantly providing a home, wages, land safety, schooling, or the return of a missing child. For Black families, the first change was the most fundamental. A person could no longer be legally sold away from a spouse, parent, or child as property. Under slavery, family bonds had existed without dependable protection from the law. Enslaved people married, raised children, created extended kin networks, chose caregivers, worshiped together, and defended their relationships in every way available to them. But an enslaver, creditor, estate executor, or slave trader could disregard those bonds. A husband might live on a neighboring plantation. A child might be transferred to settle a debt. A family formed through love could be broken apart through a business transaction. Emancipation destroyed the enslaver's legal ownership. It did not reveal where the people already sold away had gone. So roads filled with freed people moving for reasons of their own, sometimes leaving a former plantation simply to prove that no one could order them to remain. Others traveled with a precise purpose. They were looking for family. How could someone find a mother whose surname might have changed several times? People asked soldiers, ministers, bureau agents, wagon drivers, and travelers. They wrote letters to former plantations and communities where relatives had last been seen. They carried remembered names, the name of an enslaver, the location of a sale, a physical description, or a childhood detail recognizable only inside the family. Black churches and newspapers became information networks. Historian Heather Andrea Williams has reconstructed these searches from letters, interviews, public records, and information wanted advertisements. The Last Seen Project, founded by historian Judith Giesberg and developed with Villanova University and Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, collects advertisements placed by formerly enslaved people searching for relatives. The notices began before the Civil War, increased sharply after emancipation, and continued into the 20th century. Mothers sought children, children sought parents, siblings named the places where they had last lived together. Many searches did not end in reunion. The archive often records the question, but not the answer. Yet the search itself changed the meaning of freedom. Under slavery, a sale announced that an enslaver's property claim mattered more than a family relationship. After slavery, every letter journey and newspaper notice declared the opposite. The second major change appeared on certificates like the one belonging to Isaac and Catherine Kelly. Black marriages could now receive legal recognition. This did not mean enslaved marriages had been emotionally unreal. It meant governments had refused to protect them because enslaved people could not make contracts with full legal standing and could always be sold. After emancipation, Southern legislatures, military officials, clergy, and the Freedmen's Bureau developed different procedures for recognizing existing unions and recording new ones. The Bureau helped issue tens of thousands of marriage certificates. Why would a couple who already considered themselves married need a government document? Legal marriage could affect inheritance, custody, property, legitimacy in the eyes of the state, and the right to be recognized as a spouse. A certificate gave a family written evidence that officials had previously denied it. It could place the names of a husband, wife, and sometimes their children into a permanent record. For descendants today, such documents may provide the first surviving federal record of an ancestor's family. But recognition carried complications. 19th century marriage law was patriarchal. It generally treated the husband as head of the household and often limited a married woman's independent legal and economic authority. Historian Amy Drew Stanley has shown that Emancipation-era Americans connected freedom to two kinds of contract: the labor contract and the marriage contract. Officials sometimes expected freedmen to control their wives and children in the very act of declaring the household free. Black women did not simply accept every official definition of family life. They negotiated work, defended children, searched for relatives, sought wages, left abusive relationships, appealed to bureau agents, taught school, and built mutual aid networks. Freedom created legal possibilities, but Black families still had to struggle over who would define their responsibilities. That struggle was especially fierce when children were involved. Parents could now claim authority over their children instead of living under an enslaver's power. Many tried to remove sons and daughters from plantation labor and place them in school. White landowners saw a threat. Children had been a valuable source of coerced labor, and losing control of their time changed the plantation economy. Some Southern Black codes attempted to recover that control. These were state laws passed after the Civil War to restrict Black freedom. Vagrancy rules could punish people who lacked approved employment. Annual contract rules narrowed a worker's ability to leave. Apprenticeship laws allowed courts to bind some Black children to white employers, often former enslavers, when officials declared their parents unable to support them. In plain language, a judge could label a family poor and then take its child for labor. Parents resisted. They petitioned officials, went to bureau offices, fought in court, retrieved children themselves, or moved away. The documents assembled by the Freedmen in Southern Society Project include both the joy of reunited families and the distress of parents confronting involuntary apprenticeship. Emancipation had made parental custody a claim Black families could assert. Racist courts and labor demands made that claim dangerously insecure. Work itself changed next. Enslaved labor had been compelled by ownership and violence. After emancipation, employers were supposed to pay wages or share a crop under a contract. On paper, that was an enormous difference. A worker could bargain reject terms leave at the end of an agreement and demand payment. Families could try to decide who worked in the fields, who cared for children, and how their earnings were used. Many freed people rejected the old gang labor system, in which groups worked under constant supervision and sought more control over their pace and household time. But what is a labor contract worth when one side owns nearly all the land, tools, credit, and food? Many formerly enslaved families entered sharecropping arrangements. Instead of receiving a normal wage, a family farmed part of a landowner's property and received a portion of the crop after expenses. Merchants frequently supplied food, seed, clothing, and tools on credit, secured by a claim on the future harvest. The landowner or merchant often kept the accounts. A poor crop, manipulated ledger, or high interest charge could leave the family in debt and make departure extremely difficult. This was not slavery in law. A sharecropper could not legally be sold. A marriage was recognized, children were not property, yet debt, racial violence, discriminatory courts, and vagrancy enforcement could sharply restrict the freedom those legal changes promised. Land might have altered that balance. In January 1865, General William T. Sherman's Special Field Orders No. 15 reserved a specific coastal region of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for Black settlement, with parcels of up to 40 acres. It was a wartime order for a limited area, not a national grant to every freed family. Still, thousands began farming land under federal protection. The experiment was soon reversed. President Andrew Johnson's restoration policies returned most abandoned and confiscated property to pardoned former Confederates. By late 1865, many Black families were removed from land they had begun to cultivate. The National Archives preserves petitions from freed people asking to purchase and hold even a few acres of their own. Without broad land redistribution, most families entered freedom with their labor, but little property. That shaped who could survive a bad harvest, educate a child, move to another county, or challenge an abusive employer. The end of ownership in people did not end the concentration of ownership in land. Education offered another route toward independence. Across the South, black communities organized schools and churches, cabins rented rooms, and purpose-built structures. Adults attended beside children or studied after work. People who had learned to read in secret taught neighbors. Families contributed money, building materials, food, and lodging for teachers. The Freedmen's Bureau worked with black communities and aid societies rather than creating this demand from nothing. By 1870, according to National Park Service research, the Bureau supported more than 1,500 schools, serving more than 100,000 pupils. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture preserves the story of Harriet Smith, a formerly enslaved Texas woman who became a teacher and later led her own school. Why did literacy matter so urgently inside the home? Reading could help a worker examine a contract instead of trusting someone else's explanation. Writing could carry a family search across several states. Arithmetic could expose a false account. A child who learned to read could teach a parent. A school also created a place where black people governed. An institution hired teachers, held meetings, and imagined a future not organized around plantation labor. Churches performed a similar role. Independent black congregations offered worship beyond white supervision, but they also hosted schools, aid societies, political meetings, and family searches. Ministers and lay leaders helped circulate news and organize communities. The family was becoming part of a larger black civic world built by freed people themselves. Reconstruction eventually changed the family's relationship to the nation. The 14th Amendment established birthright citizenship and equal protection in 1868. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote because of race, color, or previous enslavement in 1870, though it applied politically to men in an era when women of every race were excluded from federal voting protection. Black men voted, served on juries in some places, held local office, entered state legislatures, and went to Congress. Black women organized meetings, raised funds, taught, petitioned, supported political campaigns, and challenged the idea that citizenship belonged only to men. Political power was not an abstract prize. It could determine whether a school received funds, whether a labor contract was enforced, whether a road reached a black community, and whether authorities acted when a family was threatened. That is why white supremacist violence targeted homes, schools, churches, teachers, landowners, and political organizers. Terror was intended to make citizenship too costly to exercise. As federal commitment to Reconstruction weakened and former Confederates regained state power, segregation and disfranchisement narrowed many of the gains black families had fought to secure. Still, the clock did not simply turn back to 1860. Black Americans were no longer property under state law. Their marriages had legal standing. Their children could not lawfully be inherited or auctioned. Families created schools, churches, businesses, associations, newspapers, and political traditions that endured through the Jim Crow era and became foundations for later civil rights movements. These were not gifts handed down by the government. They were institutions built under pressure by people acting on their own understanding of freedom. One modern echo lies inside the records themselves. Descendants now search digitized Freedmen's Bureau files and last-seen advertisements for names that slavery scattered across ledgers, bills of sale, military papers, labor contracts, and marriage registers. A certificate created to recognize a couple in 1866 can help a family in the 21st century recover a line of kinship. Even these archives must be read cautiously. Surviving records are uneven. Officials often wrote through their own prejudices, and many black voices were never recorded at all. Historians combined government files with newspapers, letters, oral testimony, photographs, family memory, and material evidence, and new discoveries can revise what seems certain today. Freedom after 1865 did not restore every missing relative. It did not deliver equal land, fair wages, safe schools, unbiased courts, or permanent political protection. What it changed was the legal foundation from which black people could insist that their spouses were spouses, their children were their children, their labor belonged to them, and their families had claims upon the future. That is what the Nashville marriage certificate recorded on May 12, 1866. Not that freedom had repaired a black family, but that a black family was using freedom to begin repairing what slavery had done.